is the real world, like a Shambhala kingdom, a world where people live long, they don't lie, they're beautiful, they don't do Pol Pot type stuff or Brexits. It's not full of ignorance. So anyway, aesthetics is interesting and it matters. And Nietzsche contributed to this. One of my favourite thinkers of aesthetics is a man called Gebser, a philosopher from the early 20th century. He was from Alsace-Lorraine, and he was a friend of some of the modern arts people like Picasso and Mondrian and all these people. He lived in Paris. He became Minister of Culture for the Spanish Republic for a while before Franco chased him out. And he retired to Switzerland, where he wrote this masterpiece called The Ever-Present Origin, which is one of the most important philosophical texts of the 20th century. Jean Gebser. Not many people have heard of him. And he argued that modern art looks like it's not very beautiful, it's ugly, it's crazy. He said no, but it's making a metaphysical leap forward, because traditional art, which paints the thing as it is just very clever, we love it, it's beautiful. But what modern art is trying to do is paint the thing behind the thing. It's trying to find the deep structure or the immanent structure within the form. So when an impressionist paints a lily or a boat or a girl, they don't paint it exactly as it is, but more as the ideal representation of it. Anyway, Gebser is a genius. I think he's my favourite theorist of art in all the philosophers I've read, and he draws on many, many other sources. He's a brilliant thinker. But long may the conversation go on. I think one thing I know, and the reason I focus on peace, is that war is ugly. Bombing, destroying, killing, what's happened in Gaza is an ugliness, morally and also practically. Killing bodies like that with AI-inspired random drops of bombs is morally unacceptable. It's ugly. And what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, if, God forbid, but if there's a nuclear war in my lifetime or any time really, I mean, that will be the most anti-aesthetic, the most ugly event that can happen. And it happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a horrific thing. So in fighting for peace, as I'm trying to do as coordinator of Philosophers of Peace, what I'm trying to do is fight for beauty, to be able to survive, to live on for this world. What is done to, and this is where the laws of compassion come in. This is why Tolstoy was going on about peace is about love. It's about compassion to animals, to the weakest people in society, and so on. If you kill and destroy, it's a moral and aesthetic ugliness as well. Yes, and that's why all the deities are creators. They're creative. Like the great architect of the universe is an architect, Ptah. And we talk of God as the creator. Okay, so that's that one. We love it. Any comments or?
No, thank you very much.
Have you ever been an artist yourself? Do you ever create like poetry or painting or music? You weren't brought up to play any instruments or anything?
No.
I think I was fortunate. My mother made me learn the piano and sent me to art classes and theatre groups and things. So she was determined to give me a training in the arts, and I don't regret it. I just wish I had more time to practice them all. I'd love to have a longer week so I could have a day of painting, a day of music, a day of theatre writing. There's not enough time to do everything. But that's why one has to. And I just want to say, that's why I'm involved with the Delphic Academy, as coordinator of the Delphic Academy. The Delphic Games were the art contests of the ancient world, classical world, and Pindar, the great poet, and others used to go. we've revived them, my dear friend Christian Kirsch in Berlin and others, and I'm the academic wing of the Delphic movement. We're trying to write the history of what happened and the recreation of it. And, you know, I'd like to see all the artists of the world competing in these Delphic Games in every branch of the arts, fashion, design, and also ecological arts. That's a new category Christians brought in for the Delphic Games, because things like garden design, landscape gardening, these kind of things, and the social and communicative arts as well. So, you know, we're inventing new art forms, things like the internet. Web design didn't exist 50 years ago. What will there be 100 years from now? What kind of arts will they be doing? I hope they're beautiful and non-violent. Okay, I'm going to do my one now, which is the Baha'is. They're an interesting tradition, the Baha'is, and I've met quite a few Baha'is over the years and been close to them. And when I was Secretary General for the World Conference on Religion and Peace in London for 7 or 8 years, I was friends with the head of the Baha'is of Britain, and we used to meet in their centre in Westminster. Baha'i is from the word from Baha'u'llah, which means the glory of God, their founder, who lived in the 19th century originally from Persia. His lineage was an offshoot of Shia faith, which is the branch of Islam that honours Ali and the 12 Imams. But they were impatient, these Shias. They were radical. They wanted God's good news to come back in glory and strength now. Why should it just be in a book? Can't we have like an update of the Quran, you know? And so there was this idea that a new prophet was going to come, who'd be bringing more good news from God. Why should God only send Muhammad? That was a long time ago. And why can't we have another one, please? So the Baha'u'llah followers said that he was that new prophet. And he accepted that with some perturbation, because, of course, the official Muslims then said, no, you can't be. We don't have any more prophets. Muhammad was the last. And they accused him of heresy. And so they put him in prison. And he was imprisoned. He was only escaped from prison thanks to the intervention of the Russian consul. Thank you, Russia. At least you did one good thing. Can you please go back to doing good stuff? And he was allowed to go to, eventually, he went to Haifa, which was then under the Ottoman Empire. Persians kicked him out, so he went to the Ottoman Empire. They didn't like him either. They were Sunni Muslims, and they thought he was a heretic too, but they were a bit gentler. They let him stay under house arrest in Haifa. And I've been to the place. There's a monument to him. It's now in Israel. And these Baha'is believed that he was the next prophet in a sequence. So we have Abraham, then Moses, then Jesus, then Muhammad. And then you have Baha'u'llah. And he left some amazing writings. I've got some of his writings here, and they're very beautifully written. He wrote letters to heads of state. He acted very much as if a prophet had come to sort out problems of the world. He foresaw a time of universal peace. The nations of the world would live in harmony. There would be arbitration mechanisms set up to adjudicate between them all. Women would have equal rights with men. There'd be none of this kind of women are inferior people. Human rights would be given to all, of whatever religion. Science and religion should work hand in hand. There should be no belief in superstitious, ghosts under the bed if it was against science. He wanted reason and mysticism to go hand in hand. He was a very wise person, actually. He had a lovely long beard like Father Christmas and looked very much like the prophet of a new religion. He believed in immortality of the soul, survival of the soul after death. And you kind of go on a spiral of eternal life depending on your ethical progression in each particular life. Believed in kindness to animals, harmony with the environment. He believed in a just and rational world government that would come, replacing the current set of. I mean, he'd be appalled that we still haven't got there. We're in 2024, and yet we still have all these wars going on. And in his own dear part of the world, the Middle East, we have this terrible chaos and confrontation between Israel, Palestine, Iran, Lebanon. He would say, no, brethren, make peace. You know, and Baha'is are working flat out behind the scenes. There's about 5 million of them working all over the world to try and bring about the vision that he saw of a world of peace. Sometimes they've been persecuted, sadly, by extremist religious groups who won't let them, who still say they're heretics and stuff. I would say it's time to have a mature conversation between all these faiths, and the Baha'is should be part of that. And that's why they have their, honoured place. They're technically a new religious movement. Often new religious movements get persecuted by the old ones, who want to suppress the new ones coming along, which is kind of, there's a sociological thing goes on. The founder of modern Switzerland, James Fasey, wrote a book about gerontocracy, how the old guard always suppress the new coming through in politics and also in religion. So we've got to, outthink that. And I'd love to live in a world, where those values that the Baha'is espouse would become true. A colleague of mine, Daniel Pera, I think he's called, is involved with the UN. They're now running the Summit for the Future at the UN on the 18th to the 22nd of September. It's coming up. And, there's Baha'is involved in helping the UN become a vehicle for progressive universalism, inclusive of spirituality, but not in a dogmatic way, not in a this way, but in a way that's consummate with the ecumenical vision of the periodic table. So, yes, some Baha'is have been painters, some quite famous ones actually were Baha'is. Some have been poets. So there's some research to be done into, and many of them are working for world peace and world governance, which is what my World Intellectual Wisdom Forum is doing. We've had talks by some Baha'is on there. So, any questions?
You say there are about 10 million?
Okay.
In which countries?
Yeah. Scattered around Australia, Britain, Europe, European countries. Some still in Iran, in the Balkans. I have a dear Baha'i friend who's living in Ohrid in the Balkans, where I've been to the poetry festival there. And America, there's a lot of Baha'is. Canada, they're scattered around the world, really.
And it's kind of diaspora, they communicate.
It's a diaspora. Oh yeah, they're all in touch with each other.
Okay.
And there'll be a group in France and one in Paris. Probably most big French cities like Bordeaux have members. And they elect, they're very democratic. Each Baha'i in the world becomes a citizen of the Baha'i Commonwealth. And they all get to vote on sending a representative from France or whatever to the Universal House of Justice, which meets in Haifa and debates philosophical, metaphysical, religious matters,
It looks like an utopia. I'm very happy you choose that one. I didn't know.
You didn't know about it?
No. It's crazy to see.
Well, you didn't do religious studies as a student.
No.
And you didn't have me as head of department.
Yeah.
I always make sure, that's why I ask my kids to learn every single one.
Oh.
Just so you know the landscape, right? I'm glad you've discovered them. I have some of their writings and stuff. I can show you more. Okay, so that's jolly exciting. And I have a book where Baha'u'llah is likened to Maitreya, the new Messiah, you know, etc., etc. He also, just to say, he died, but he lived in the Victorian era, and then he was succeeded by the next chap in line, Abdul Baha, his son, took over, who was another charismatic, wonderful, lovely gentleman, who was given a knighthood by Queen Victoria. But he didn't use it. But because the British quite liked the Baha'is, they thought they were, you know, good, working for the same cause. Because at that time, the people running the British Empire, the good ones, not the bad ones, we wanted also a world of peace, justice, brotherhood. A lot of people were Freemasons trying to work for a universal brotherhood kind of thing. And they recognised the Baha'is as a kindred spirits, if you want. And then this chap, Abdul Baha, I think it was, in World War One, he was under house arrest, and the Turks were going to kill him because they didn't like this kind of idea. And the British actually managed to rescue him in time when we invaded, I think, Haifa in those terrible conflicts that were going on. And one of the people that did that was a chap who later set up a thing called the Lamplighers. He was a British army officer who personally rescued this guy, Abdul Baha. And he founded a thing called the Silent Minute Trust, that we should every night at 10 o'clock have a minute's silence. And I'm a member of the trust that runs that, you know. I can't remember his name, it'll come to me when I but so I have a bit of a link there. There's an interesting history. So let's keep working for world peace, is what I would say to all my Baha'i friends, and anyone that understands the inner glory of this wisdom, you know, is someone in that light, I would say. You don't have to be a formal Baha'i to recognise it, you know. You can be a Christian or whatever and still honour that. Okay, let's move on and let's look at the gods. Let's have a little calling in with the gods and see what they're up to. And we've had some interesting ones recently. Yes. Here, you do yours first. Thank you. Okay, right. Aha. Well. So, we have the Page of Fire, and we have the God of Light in the Persian religion, which on the periodic table is one of the purple ones here. And it's called Mithraism. And Mithras is an interesting deity who, he was not only important in Persia, but he also spread west, and so became very important, particularly in the Roman army. Which is ironic, given that the Romans and the Persians were supposed to be enemies, fighting each other. It's interesting. It's as if the American army in Vietnam all converted to worship a Vietnamese jungle deity. You know, like I can't get my head around the psychology of it. But then I suppose it's like the Roman Empire ending up worshipping a particular Jewish rabbi from Galilee. I mean, it's this inversion of wanting to identify with the victim culture that you've been oppressing. I suppose it's like St. Paul did. And there's probably a name for that in psychosociology. It may not have been coined yet, but it ought to be. Anyway, so Mithras, yes, he's quite a cool deity, and scholars of religious studies have been exploring him for the last 100 years or so. I reference a lot of their research in the text that goes with the cards. And I found out some interesting stuff. He might have had something to do with the creation of the tarot themselves. There's a book by Stephen Aldred, I think he's called, who reckons that it was Mithraic initiates who first put together the first tarot deck as a teaching tool to spread their ideas, which was then adopted in the Hermetic traditions of Egypt. He's quite an occult deity. His name is related to the Vedic god Mitra, and and it seems to go back to a common root meaning friendship, which is where the same root of the word Maitreya comes from. The new Buddha that's coming, Buddha Maitreya, will be the next one, who's going to emphasize cooperation, friendship, and love, as opposed to the old Buddha that grumbled that everyone was suffering and it was all a gloomy world. Maitreya is going to be much more like a rainbow Buddha, and I've always, quite liked Maitreya. I was disappointed when Benjamin Cream died, and Maitreya still hadn't appeared in the East End of London. He kept promising, he was channeling Maitreya was going to turn up, and we're still waiting. But I think the point there is that we are, all of us, Maitreya or Mithras, who is the god of light within us all. It's interesting, the Mithraic initiations had certain steps. We know to become a Mithraic initiate, it took a while. It was like Freemasonry. You had to join at the first base level, and they met in underground chapels, and archaeologists have found these all over the Roman Empire. And there was a really big one in Bordeaux, which is now in the museum in Bordeaux. I've been there, and you can see it. It's fascinating. They were in Rome. There was one in London just by what became the Bank of England. So, conspiracy theorists might want to say, it's all Mithras pulling the tail of the donkey. But yeah, so it's fascinating. The levels were, first level to join was called Corax, the raven or crow. And when you were initiated into that, you were given certain things, a caduceus, which is the wand of Mercury and stuff. The next level was a nymphus, a bridegroom, and you were given a veil of Venus. The next level up was a soldier, Miles, and you were given instructions on how to be faithful to Mars. The next level up was Leo, and here you were dedicated to Jupiter, and you were given appropriate things. And then I see a link between these and the 7 chakras, by the way, as you go up. Then you are initiated into the 5th level, Perseus, or Perses, the Persian. You're given a Phrygian cap, and you worship the moon. And then the 6th is called the Sun Runner, Heliodromus, and you're given a torch and images of Helios, the sun god. And you're sworn on each one would take like a year to work through, so it's a 7-year job, right? And then finally you become a pater, a father. It was an all-male cult, so far as we know, certainly in the Roman army. I'm not sure, they probably had girls' nights when they could take their wives and girlfriends, a bit like Masons. And when you became a pater, you got a mitre, and you got a shepherd's staff, and a ruby ring, and a cape. And you were dedicated to Saturn. Now, what's interesting is that in Rome, at the time of the Christian Empire was just about to be launched, Mithras was the other great religion underground. It was as popular as the Christian religion. And it could well have been that if Constantine had been brought up in a Mithraic tradition, the Roman Empire would have become officially Mithraic. But instead, he made it Christian. And I argue in the text of this book, and please do read it, I think there's huge evidence that St. Paul was an initiate of Mithras. His language is all Mithraic. He straps on the breastplate of righteousness. He gets the sword of truth to fight the good fight for the God of light, who is Christ incarnate, the Word, the only one. I think what Paul thought in his dazzled mind is that Christ was Mithras come to earth to save mankind, and that he was his chosen vehicle to spread the light of. It wasn't just some old random charismatic preacher from Galilee. No, that was Mithras. That was the Son of God who'd come. And I think that's what inspired Paul to be so like, you can torture me, you can burn my body, I don't care, but I know he was the Son of God. He was Mithras. Anyway, that's. I think I'm the only guy that's worked this out that I know of. No Christian theologian or historian has ever made the connection between the two. And my speculation is that when the popes, the early popes, were negotiating power, they did a deal with the Mithraic popes, the equivalent, and they said, look, let's amalgamate. We'll create this thing called Roman Catholicism. We'll wear the mitre, the pater, our highest grade of initiate, will be our bishops and archbishops and popes. And so, like, we're one thing here. We shouldn't be fighting. Like, Paul was an initiate of Mithras. So let's make peace and let's just take over the Roman Empire and do a deal. And I wish I could invent a time machine and go back historically with a Google Translate device on the windscreen and listen in to these conversations. Because I think, A, that Paul was an initiate of Mithras, because he came from the Eastern Empire. That's where it was. And his theology is utterly based on it. And B, I think that the church that he founded and developed was very Mithraic by the end, and essentially, adopted many of the teachings and symbols. What would Christ have made of it all? Was Christ a Mithraic initiate? I also discuss that because there is some evidence that he certainly knew a lot about the Zoroastrian religion, and his theology is quite Zoroastrian. Oppose the devil, which is a thing Zoroastrians do, and Mithras did. Mithras defeats the devil. He's like the great super helper to God, Ahura Mazda, who defeats evil. So Christ certainly would have known about all this stuff, and I think in his private prayers, for all we know, he may well have had, let's say, Mithraic tendencies. Also, it was quite, there were famous political leaders in what's now called, Armenia. There was a Mithridates who was a rival to Rome at one point. The Mithridatic Empire was an important political power at the time. So people knew about Mithras as an alternative to the gods of Rome or Greece. So anyway, I speculate. I just ask questions in the text. So I think what the card is telling us is that we all ought to be on our toes and be very righteous. If we're going to get through this phase of the planet's meltdown, we have to become like sun runners, Heliodromus, and we have to be good parents, good fathers and mothers. I wonder if any feminists have created a female-friendly version of Mithraism. If not, why not? But it's a mystery tradition at the end of the day. Jung writes about it as its psychological meaning. And yes, we have an epic poem by Statius, a Latin poet, who writes about Mithras in his cave. So there's interesting stuff there. Now, okay, next one, the one I got, interesting enough, is Saturn, who is the deity of the 7th grade of the Mithraic Initiates. And Saturn, in his Roman guise, Saturn is a Roman god, was a beneficent god with his wife Ops, who stood for plenty and fecundity and love and fruits and good gardens. So this is the World Peace Gardens card. This is what we need to do, is to get the world back into being gardeners, like Voltaire wanted, so that we can worship, the gods without impinging on each other. We don't trash each other's gardens. I happen to like libraries. My library is a garden. That's the way I do gardening, is I research books and stuff. Other people plant whatever, fruit trees. We don't impinge on each other, and that should be a cast iron law. One of my dear friends, Mazin Kuntsier in Palestine, has a botanical garden where he's growing all kinds of rare plants and things. He just wants to live in peace with his Israeli friends and neighbours and not trash each other. The people of Gaza love their gardens. They were growing lots of things, even in their small territory. It's all been trashed. I think this is scandalous. So Saturn is saying, enough of all this war. Let's go back to being gardeners of beauty. And Ops is one of my favourite goddesses. Sneaks into the deck here as his wife. And she's the origin of the word office, opulence, official, copying. So she's fecund, she's always copying things. And so when you talk about a police officer, it's an ops. I suppose ops has got a bad name, we talk about black ops. But I think she's doing good ops. For peace. So I think Mithras and Saturn together bring good news, and let us hope that the world reaches a bit more enlightenment than currently is the case. Yes. Okay, any questions? Any comments? One person who listens to my talks said, why don't I use the I Ching? Why do I use the tarot? Okay, so I haven't written a book and a card deck about the I Ching. It's on my list. I want to do a commentary on the I Ching. It's on my list. But until I do, I'm not going to use the I Ching. My daughter wants me to use the runes. I've written a book about the runes. So, okay, I can use the runes too. But I quite like using the gods because they're the highest level of planetary management from a theological perspective. And I think whether you interpret them as real or as archetypes, it doesn't matter. It's an energy that we can invoke to do healing work, and psychological clearing is how I see it. Okay. Let us stop there, and let's hope this...
Did you have a poem, maybe?
Oh, okay, I could finish with a poem, yeah. That'd be nice. Yes, we did aesthetics, so let's have a poem to finish. Yes. Right. Well. Well, here's a poem called Praise Poem to the Sun.